Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with episode 3 of the Chaos Dwarf Q&A. We're not going to waste any time, let's just start going into the questions. This will be the last episode, of the Chaos Dwarf culture category, and we'll be heading into the technology category without any breath. We'll just go straight into it. So, today's first question. How do the Chaos Dwarfs feel about necromancy and the undead? The Chaos Dwarfs don't run into necromancy or the undead terribly often, but they have an extremely consistent trait as viewing anything not of Hashit or the Dawizar as being just inferior. They wouldn't have the extreme distaste for necromancy like their western kin. If anything, the Chaos Dwarfs would probably find the idea enticing if they could find a way to claim necromancy and its power for themselves. Being able to force slaves to continue working even after death would be quite useful after all. However, there's one major issue. The Chaos Dwarfs do not trust anyone but their own kind, and they would never allow themselves to rely upon the efforts of some rogue vampire or necromancer, especially considering the undead's typical disdain for the servants of chaos. So while if they were able to somehow find a way to utilize necromancy, I don't think they would hesitate to exploit anyone and everyone that they could. They don't have the capabilities for it, at least not without someone teaching them, and they would never accept teaching from a non-Chaos Dwarf. So they're kind of caught in this situation where they really don't have the ability to make use of necromancy without relying on someone like a necromancer or a vampire. Thus, to them, it's just another thing to be crushed and stomped beneath their iron tread. There is, of course, a ogre worth talking about very, very briefly, Brog the Slave Lord, who is an ogre that has a necromantic aura in a sense. He's kind of like Luther Harkin in that he does not have the ability to actively control his magic. He's more of a walking beacon of dark magic and necromantic power, so he's able to resurrect corpses around him, and his corpses seem to maintain their abilities for a time, likely until they are physically destroyed. They will just essentially remain animated, so he often will create these massive slave trains of chained up corpses that he takes to Tsar Nagrund or the other Chaos Dwarf outposts, and he actually sells these undead slaves to the Chaos Dwarfs, who are then put to work in their mines and other areas where they need such hardy creatures. However, they don't seem to have any ability to keep them animated once their natural abilities wear out, either because the magic in them is snuffed out or the bodies are just worn down to the point that they can no longer function. So yeah. Next question. Are there any cultural similarities between the Dwarfs and Chaos Dwarfs? Yes, I think we've covered this well enough between many questions, but to put it simply and bluntly, they share their cultural reverence for oaths, loyalty, grudges, respect for elders, and kinship. There are also still remnants of commonality between their runecraft, technological skill, language, fondness for alcohol, and caring for their beards, but all of these have been heavily distorted or twisted among the Chaos Dwarfs over the millennia. Next up, our third question for today. Are there any particular materials that the Chaos Dwarfs desire above all others that they acquire through mining or other methods? For example, Gromril. The Chaos Dwarfs do love Gromril when they can get their hands on it, but for the Chaos Dwarfs, their major desires when it comes to resources is just more slaves. Sometimes they do require very specific types of slaves. For instance, elves are very rare and always in demand by the sorcerers of Hashit, as their blood and essence, their souls you could say, is a critical component of many alchemical mixtures. There is no note of any particular metal or mineral being precious to the Chaos Dwarves above all others, as the Dawizar forged most of their work out of iron and bronze. that is reinforced to an obscene level by their runecraft and demonsmithing. They don't seem particularly concerned with specifically high quality materials, though they do have some kind of unique form of obsidian that they have discovered in the Darklands that they seem to use to craft the city of Zarnagrund itself, as well as likely forming a critical component of the infamous and legendary Dark Shard armor, which is the Chaos Dwarf equivalent to Gromril or the Chaos armor worn by the Warriors of Chaos, the really high quality, nasty stuff. Our next question: what language or languages do the Chaos Dwarfs speak? So, the Chaos Dwarfs all speak Khazalid, however, it is a slightly distorted version due to how they have adapted separate from the dwarfs over the years. So if you were to put a dwarf and a Chaos Dwarf in the same room and they were talking to one another, they would be speaking essentially the same language, but the dialect would be different enough that they could understand one another, but it would be a little difficult. And the Chaos Dwarfs would have a number of words or concepts that would not make sense to a dwarf from the Western Kingdoms. It would be just too foreign to them. Likewise, there are words and concepts that the dwarfs have created since the two races split that would not translate well into the distorted Khazalid that the Chaos Dwarfs speak. However, in addition to their unique version of Khazalid, they also speak Darktongue, Grumbarth, which is the language of ogres and is also a language often spoken by giants, Reichspiel, which is, of course, the language of the Empire and is kind of one of the more common languages found across the planet, and they also can speak Goblin Tongue, which is how they communicate with the Hobgoblins. Those are the languages that I would say at minimum they're able to speak. However, the Chaos Dwarfs often must deal with various races when trading for slaves, and thus tend to know a very impressive assortment of languages. They're able to communicate with almost anybody, and they are very intelligent individuals that have placed a very strong value on trade and being able to manipulate or negotiate with just an absurd amount of races scattered across the Warhammer planet. So it's very likely that almost no matter where someone else was from, the Chaos Dwarfs would be able to find some way to communicate with them, with very few exceptions. Let's see, next up we have, is there any cultural significance to the Chaos Dwarfs' tusks? If so, how does it compare to Dwarfen beard culture? The Dawizar are extremely proud of their protruding tusks, and will often select armor and styles of clothing to draw attention to their tusks to make them look as fierce or terrifying as possible, even to the extent that you might see them, the way they design their beards, or perhaps even using makeup and particular masks to really emphasize those things. The tusk is probably the most prominent feature that really makes the Chaos Dwarf stand out heavily from their Western kin, and they are extremely proud of their different visage. You know, that's a gift to their entire race from Hashit, or at least the way they would view it. So there certainly is a deep pride in this race-wide mutation, but the only records that we have mentioning their tusks specifically in the lore and literature just basically refer to the tusks and the focus upon it being a major intimidation tactic against enemies. It's not usually associated with impressing other Chaos Dwarfs. It's that they seem to, I mean, they are proud of them, but the whole big focus and trying to draw attention to them seems more of an intimidation tactic, not a thing to make them look higher status or such among their peers. Though I would not at all be surprised to learn perhaps of certain Chaos Dwarfs who have them pierced or gilded or whatever to try and look more impressive in the courts of Zarnagrund. We just don't have any specific notes of that happening. Next up, What is the day-to-day like for the average Chaos Dwarf? Do they have any notable forms of entertainment? For the Chaos Dwarfs, they spend most of their time doing what they can to grow and develop the future of Zarnagrund. Whether that's training constantly for warfare, forging weapons or other mechanical creations, or overseeing the truly staggering amount of mines and tunnels that the slave population is currently working within. I mean, there are literally millions of slaves contained within the Chaos Dwarf Empire who vastly outnumber the Dawizar themselves. Those more behind the scenes in the upper tiers of the capital, especially the Dames, focus more on raising the younger generations of Chaos Dwarfs and maintaining the various clans and cultural requirements needed for day-to-day functioning. This also includes caring for expecting mothers and ensuring their safety and good health so that their population can continue to grow, as the womenfolk of the Dawizar are critical to take care of, and there's not a lot of them. In regards to entertainment, the Chaos Dwarfs' culture has warped to such an extent that they derived quite a bit of amusement from the suffering of others. Hashit is a cruel god, and has passed on this malevolence to his children, thus many forms of entertainment for them revolve around creating and testing devastating weaponry, breaking the will and dominating demons, and finding clever ways to embarrass or remove their rivals within the complex political structure of Mingalzar Nagrund. It is insinuated they maintain some of the pursuits of their western kin, so likely have the occasional form of entertainment that revolves around hunting slaves or greenskins across the plain of Zar, drinking bouts or contests to prove their superiority over one another in the eyes of Hashit, through feats of strength, dexterity, engineering, or sorcery. Ultimately, though, we don't have much information on exactly what the Chaos Dwarfs are up to in their leisure time among the upper levels of Zarnagrund. Alright. Do Chaos Dwarfs ever abandon their empire in search of new life? No. There are not a lot of them, and their culture is extremely indoctrinated and insular about sticking together and having just obnoxious levels of pride in that. There has never been such thing as a Chaos Dwarf who has sought to abandon their empire. For them, one of the worst punishments they can be dealt within Zarnagrund is to basically be exiled, which isn't true exile in the sense that you're kicked out of the empire, but you're instead sent away to one of the military posts where you have to work your way back up the ladder to hopefully earn your way back to Zarnagrund. The most notorious place that those who have been shamed or are being punished have been sent out to is, of course, the Black Fortress. Moving on. Do the Chaos Dwarfs have a ruler or the equivalent of one? The Sorcerer Prophets of Zarnagrund are the rulers of the Chaos Dwarfs overall, and technically, on paper, do not have a hierarchy among themselves. However, they do value and revere age just as the Western Dwarfs do, and so the eldest among the Sorcerer Prophets tend to hold the most political power. They also often tend to be the most powerful, which certainly helps. Currently, the oldest of the Chaos Dwarfs is the Sorcerer Prophet Astrogoth Ironhand, who is remarkably ancient, and quite the terrifying combatant thanks to his impressive magical abilities alongside his mechanical suit that allows him to move around despite much of his body having already petrified to stone. We'll talk more about him specifically later on. And then the last question for the culture subcategory: do the Chaos Dwarfs have any non-sorcerer leaders? Lords or heroes, whether in society or on the battlefield, who possess no magical talent? In society, no. Not a true, top tier leader. The Sorcerer Prophets are the ruling elite of the Chaos Dwarfs, and all Dawizar owe their loyal allegiance to one of the priests of Hashit. That being said, each of the sorcerer prophets have lords that serve under them that are non-magical leaders who lead armies sometimes or control small regiments and are often doled out to deal with particular issues or locations within Zarnagrund or the Tower of Gorgoth or the Black Fortress. Chaos Dwarf lords leading armies is not a terribly rare sight, but the most famous of these as an example is the commander of the Tower of Zar, known as Zatan the Black. Even by the standards of the Chaos Dwarfs, he is immensely cruel and greatly enjoys the suffering of others. He makes a notable sport out of it. He serves under the sorcerer prophet Gorth the Cruel. Zatan, from the records I have, is the highest ranked non-magical dwarf that there is any notes about. However, as I said, there are other lords scattered around Minglzar Nagrund in the Tower of Gorgoth alongside various heroes, such as Castellans, which are kind of the hero equivalent of Chaos Dwarf non-magical lords. And of course, there are the nightmarish bull centaur Tulruks. These individuals are all military and societal leaders, but ultimately all serve under the sorcerer prophets themselves. Alright, that's the end of the culture section, but like I said, we're not stopping. We're going to keep going, so let's just dive straight into technology with a huge question. And this was from many people, which is, how does daemonsmithing work? So there were a lot of sub-questions contained within this question, and I'm going to do my best to kind of break down daemonsmithing bit by bit. So let's dive into it. The art of daemonsmithing is quite a dangerous and mysterious one, as the Drathzar refuse to share their knowledge with any outside of their own people and guard every secret jealously. However, what is known is this: the true secret, the ultimate intelligence behind the art of capturing the essences of demons and forcing them into metallic forms is none other than Hashut. The god of tyranny seems to savor enslavement of those entities that have no blood to be sacrificed to him. And it was this mysterious god that granted the Chaos Dwarfs the knowledge of how to pluck demons from the realm of chaos itself and bind them into great machines or weapons or armor or whatever. Generally, the process works as follows. The demonsmiths and the sorcerer prophets will work carefully at their hellforges to craft some devilish creation, whether it be weapon, item, or war machine. This metallic device will most often be forged from brass, as the metal the Chaos Dwarfs have the easiest access to that not only pleases Hashut aesthetically, but seems to have a natural potential for containing the essences of raging demons. The forging processes for these containers, so to speak, not only requires all of the delicate craft and expertise one would associate with dwarfs, but also a staggering amount of blood sacrifice and ritual. Depending on the purpose of the creation, the hellsmiths in addition require quite specific ingredients. For instance, as an example, they may say, I need an elf to be flayed alive and bled over this particular ingredient to provide alchemical unguents required in the forging process for an item that performs a certain kind of role. Once the creation in question has been properly created using all the required materials and all the required steps, it will be quenched in the blood of those sacrificed to Hashut, and the process shall begin of carving runes to imbue the device with sorcerous power, so that it might perform its function and contain the essence of those demons that shall be embedded within. Once all the runes have been set and empowered, a process that you may be familiar with if you know how runecrafting works for the regular dwarfs, the most dangerous part of the forging process begins, as using the lore given by Hashut. The sorcerers of the Drathzar will perform a ritual to lure demons to them. This process will alter significantly depending on the demons required, often using the tormented souls of slaves and horrific quantities of dark magic to tempt the presence of hungry demons. These immortal nightmares, drawn to the thinness of reality at this point and hungry to push through, are then ensnared by potent wards and chanting spells, slowly forced bit by bit into the metal shells awaiting them with each pounding of a molten hot hammer. Should the hellsmith in question lack the skill or power to properly finish this part of the forging, it can go quickly awry. Whether the demon breaks free of its bonds and devours those who attempted to capture it, the creation in question explodes as the runes of containment are overwhelmed, or any number of violent mishaps. These failures are quite rare, however, as the Chaos Dwarfs know their craft well and are true masters in the art of domination. Finally, the nearly completed work will go through the final phases of any necessary rituals, and the most unstable or powerful of creations will be forced into an inert slumber until their masters awaken them to unleash devastation upon their foes. As you may see on the screen, there are a couple of sub-questions that I sort of mixed in with this one, so let's go ahead and start answering those. When it comes to technological advancement compared to the other races, the only true rival of the Chaos Dwarfs is the Skaven. The biggest difference, however, lies in how they create their weapons of mass destruction. The Dawizar prefer reliability and craftsmanship, as opposed to the Skaven of Clan Skryre, who only focus on raw power and building their creations as quickly as possible. These desires led the Skaven to relying heavily upon the treacherous but potent power of Warpstone, which, while not unknown to the Chaos Dwarfs, they rarely deal with it. They much prefer the arcane binding of demons through the sorceress lore of Hashut and their most devastating weapons instead. Not to say that Daemonsmithing is a safe process per se, but if a hellforged weapon ends up killing its crew, the Chaos Dwarfs can feel confident knowing that the hellsmith in charge was either weak, incompetent, or had failed in the eyes of Hashut, as opposed to the just pure random chance that so commonly dooms the Ratmen. Outside of demon binding, however, the Dawizar are also the true masters of steam technology. The Empire, Dwarfs of the Karaz-Ankor, and others all fall terribly short of the Chaos Dwarfs, who have used the art to craft impeccable machines and feats of construction, as they possess all of the ingenuity of the Dawi, but without any care for tradition or hesitancy to push forward with constant innovation. Finally, the Chaos Dwarfs use Daemonsmithing in all of their creations, whether it be war machines, blades, armor, protective talismans, etc. As for if they prefer certain types of demons, that doesn't seem to matter in most cases. The Demonsmiths are quite noted for being very particular about what goes into each creation, so I have no doubt that when the situation calls for it, they specifically search out and capture particular types of demons. There is a note that they tend to refrain from using the likes of greater demons unless trying to craft a truly masterful thing. But to use such powerful beings comes with a very high level of risk that even the truest and strongest masters of the lore of Hashut and Daemonsmithing may not be able to contain such a beast. Hopefully that will answer all the questions in regards to Daemonsmithing as a subject, and we can now move on. I suspect this will be today's last question, as it's a bit of a doozy, but it is quite the popular question, which is, how were the Black Orcs created, and what happened to them? How long ago was this, and have the Chaos Dwarfs continued to modify Greenskins? Oh boy. So, the Black Orcs were created by the sorcerers of the Chaos Dwarfs utilizing blood magic and infernal power, essentially meaning that they use the lore and rituals taught to them by Hashut in an attempt to create the perfect slave and high-quality soldiers, using this lore that specializes in domination, and instead of trying to dominate demons, which is something that Hashut seems to have an innate knowledge of, they were trying to dominate Greenskins, which are a much more alien concept. The goal was to craft a creature that had the hardiness and stamina of an ogre, the intellect of a human, and the ability to rapidly expand its own population in a short amount of time, which Greenskins do specialize in. This ritual likely revolved around harvesting Greenskin spores and using horrific rituals to fundamentally edit their very design, which is in line with the Chaos Dwarf's ability to manipulate life or even to create it, though often at extreme cost. However, the Dawizar did not fully understand what they were messing with and made a terrible mistake. What exactly the mistake is can only be speculated on, but there are two prevailing theories. The first is that in the process of exaggerating features such as strength, size, and intellect, the sorcerers accidentally concentrated the orc's love of battle and violent nature to such heights that it could never be tamed. The second, which is the one I personally believe, is that the nature of the sorceries unleashed to craft the Black Orcs unintentionally spread the Chaos Dwarf's own nature into their progeny, giving the Black Orcs the overwhelming desire to dominate and destroy all before them with a single-minded focus that is very unusual for a Greenskin. As for what happened to them, when the experiment concluded with the creation of the Black Orc species, it was initially considered a great success. They were everything the Sorcerer Prophets desired, and their population exploded as the Drawsar cultivated what they thought would form the new foundation of their empire. This proved to be a deep miscalculation, as the Black Orcs lacked the chaotic spirit of their fellow Greenskins, and quickly began to organize revolts against their masters. They even started bullying the other Greenskin species into following their demands, and the situation quickly devolved into a crisis for the children of Hashut, as they found themselves grossly outnumbered. The revolt entered its final phase when the Black Orcs managed to lead the Greenskins to overwhelm the lower levels of Mingulzar Nagrund itself, turning the weapons of the Chaos Dwarfs against their masters. Surrounded and caught in a deadly siege, the Dawizar were doomed to extinction at the hands of their own creations, until the infamous betrayal of the Hobgoblins. The lanky and treacherous Hobgoblins saw an interesting opportunity in backstabbing their kin to earn the gratitude of the Drawsar, so they sabotaged the various machines and started attacking the other Greenskins, which led to complete pandemonium. Taking advantage of the chaos, the Dawizar swept out from the upper levels of Zarnagrund and utterly crushed this final rebellion. They did their best to exterminate the Black Orcs, but thousands upon thousands of the clever brutes fled the Ziggurat city into the wastes of the Darklands. From there, they split, with some heading east into the mountains of Morn, and others journeying west into the Old World. That second group would prove to be incredibly important, as the tens of thousands of Greenskins caught up alongside those Black Orcs would go on to devastate the Dwarven realms, and threaten the domination of the Old World itself, because this actually introduced the concept of Greenskins that knew how to be blacksmiths, crude ones, but still a massive technological advancement for the Greenskins as a species. This new horde that updated the very concept of how the Greenskins operated and also had them organized under Black Orcs threatened to dominate the entirety of the old world itself, until they were finally defeated at the legendary battle for Blackfire Pass, where Sigmar Heldenhammer secured his new empire alongside High King Kurg and Ironbeard of the Dwarfs. As for dates, the Black Orcs were created around the Imperial year of 150 years BS, or before Sigmar, before he founded the Empire. The rebellions started only a few decades later, and would culminate in the final revolt where the Black Orcs were finally chased out of Tsar Nagrund in 100 BS. For those curious, the first Battle of Blackfire Pass was year 1 in the Imperial calendar, because that's the year that Sigmar solidified his control and formed the Empire. Lastly, no, the Chaos Dwarfs have never attempted to recreate the experiment of the Black Orcs. They learned their lesson the hard way, and teetered perilously close to extinction. The particular sorcerer held responsible for the experiment faced the wrath of his peers, and suffered the worst punishment the Chaos Dwarfs had to offer. Not only was his name and history struck from all records, he was taken to Uzkulak and cast into the darkest depths for whatever indescribable horrors lurk within. That's going to be it for this particular episode of the Chaos Dwarfs Q&A. I hope I'll see you guys back again soon for the 4th episode as we continue to delve into the technology of the Chaos Dwarfs and their empire. Until next time, thank you so much for watching,